Hello, and welcome to a conversation with noted educator, fishery biologist, and conservationist Terry Harmon. Terry is a legend amongst fishing enthusiasts, conservationists, and educators in our region for his pioneering work at University School fish propagation and the conservation of native brook trout, projects that drew the attention of and support of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History Trout Club. The Trout Club itself was founded in 1978 with a mission to promote cold water fisheries and habitats, conservation and stream ecology. The Trout Club also sponsors classes, activities, and events related to fly fishing and outings to a variety of prime angling locations throughout the year. Today we want Terry to tell his unique story of a life with trout.
Thank you. At the start, I want to thank the Trout Club of the museum and the museum itself for hosting what I hope will be a presentation that impresses people about what we can do about preserving our vanishing wildlife in terms of fish in this case. I've been asked to cover what my youth was like that might give an indication of how young people could get into interest about conservation of vanishing wildlife and of preserving an environment that is sustainable and continues the legacy of the work of so many people that have tried to and succeeded in preserving wildlife and informing the public about their role in identifying with nature. To me, it's true that you can't really destroy something you identify with. So if you identify with nature, it's a natural it's a natural inclination for most people. Most people do not have the time to really get into nature except for brief encounters through visits to national parks and hikings. But the work that stands ahead of us too in education is to get people, young people, into a deeper interest, a professionalizing of work that will lead to dramatic action and policies from government, local and higher up, to preserve systems that support all forms of life and enrich our own, therefore.
Well, let's amplify on that, Terry, because clearly you are incredibly passionate about this, about the environment, and about connecting people with nature. So the question comes is, how did you get connected? What is it about your story, your youth, that drew you to the out of doors and those experiences, particularly with fish, that shaped your entire career?
I had a most unusual youth. My father's family were all on the Great Lakes. They were Great Lakes sailors and shipping people. And as a little kid, around 7, I was invited to take some trips with uncles on these Great Lakes freighters. And at that time, we also had a farm in Lake County, North Madison, off Town Line Road. We had a peach farm. That was a secondary activity. My father was a businessman with automobiles and had been successful enough to buy some land in the Lake County in the early 1940s and took over a farm that yielded some peaches up through the 60s at least, but it gave me the childhood that you probably saw as a poster child picture on Norman Rockwell, with the little kid barefoot running down a dusty road with a dog and some trout hanging from the handlebars of a bike, you know. So I did have that. We had Lake Erie was right on the edge of the farm. I could visit the lake daily. In the back, we had a water supply for the house that was a cistern filled by a spring that flowed about 20 gallons a minute. It was a beautiful freshwater spring. And when the cistern overflowed, it started a stream through a ravine that paralleled the west side of the property and went into Lake Erie. My older brother and my father and his farm assistant built a dam when I was about 8 years old, We built this dam, and it produced about an eighth of an acre pond in a V-shaped valley. A lot of shade. We had yellow birch at the bank and hemlocks. It was a kind of semi-northern kind of environment. And my interest in the outdoors was extended immensely by my mother. My father was pretty much on the trees and the crops on the farm, but my mother thought another crop would be to give me some project one summer when I was 10 years old to hatch some trout on this cold water pond that was available. Previous to this, my father had taken my sisters and my brother and me on several trips into the north woods of Canada by canoe. And in those trips in the early 50s, I learned to fall in love with the North Country and clean rivers and lakes, which were so extensive, so numerous. I remember the first time that I had seen a brook trout. And it was after a 2-hour motorboat trip up a lake in Quebec, western Quebec, that towed 2 canoes. And when we got to the end of the lake, it was the headwaters of a river called the Des Moines River. And Des Moines River is still, I think, a famous brook trout river. So we went to a pond off the river, one of the many ponds that are in the Canadian Shield, and camped. And I remember 2 of the party alternating with portaging these canoes up a big hill, and then trying to recover from that, get down to the pond, which to me was such a perfect example of Northwood's beauty, a kind of sustained water, black water pond, a shallow area with a lot of lilies, and a brook feeding into it and out of it into the Des Moines River. We camped. I remember getting in the canoe. My sister was in the bow, my father was in the back, and I was sitting in the middle. I think that's when I was 7 years old. And the man that knew this pond with the other canoe people took us over to a part of the lake where the stream came in, and immediately started to catch these fish that I had never seen before. So I was allowed to fish with a worm, of course, at that age. There was nothing fancy. My father did some fly fishing, and I got a line tug, and it was enormous. And it fought, and having that kind of heavy line that doesn't break with bad fishing technique, they landed this brook trout that was about 4 pounds, and it was a male, and it was beautiful colors. And I can remember that's what probably impressed me the most, was the beauty of this fish in this landing net against that water, and then looking up against the background of the North Woods with the beautiful birches mixed with spruce and pine. And that fish was consumed at a campfire, and the food value even enhanced that, the appreciation. Well, back to my mother, she negotiated for us to get fertile brook trout eggs for this pond for me to hatch them. So this passion for going around hatching trout at a hatchery at school comes from the fact that that activity so impressed me that we could hatch fish on a small pond, that we could have those fish as a table fish, while right in front of the house we could catch all the walleye and blue pike, which I'm sure I helped bring into extinction because they're gone. It was, as I mentioned, an ideal youth. So between farm chores, raising the trout on a pumped water supply from the pond into a hatchery box that we all engaged in watching, it was just fabulous to see these fish hatch in April. And then we put them in the pond, and it was totally successful. It gave me the idea that even in the smallest of ponds, if the water temperature was correct, you could have these fish. And they grew enormously. There was a lot of food in this pond. Snails mostly showed up in the fish. Then I went off to, high school, which was at Gilmore, off Fairmount and Som Center Road. And from there, I met a brother the Brothers of Holy Cross run Gilmore, and the brother that was named Vincentius. He probably had the most influence on what I later did at university and do at university school. He had a thing, it was called, a more formal name called Academy Appointments. And that meant that boys who would volunteer, it was not a punishment thing, it sounds like, but we would work in a greenhouse, we worked in forestry on the property, and there was a pond there. And we studied everything from frogs to, so we had what were called seasonal opportunities. And that meant that each season that the school was running, there was something to see, where there's something to look for. Deer in the rut period, frogs in the spring, salamanders, bass and bluegill spawning in the shorelines of the pond at the school. All of that fed into really a love of this stuff. And it impressed me so much that it was done in juxtaposition with formal course in biology or chemistry. So I went off to college. I was lucky. I took a break between high school and college for 2 years. I worked on an ore carrier on the Great Lakes. I followed my father's family tradition, and it was a major stage in growing up. It was rough work. Men were the most impressive people in some ways to me. They were the hardest working people, and yet they were also had a lot of sufferings. Sailing is not a normal life for most people, and the people I met and they influenced me were tremendous to me. Stories abound, but that's another thing about what those guys did with young people to make sure that they developed properly on the ship. It was completely against what people think about sailors, rough life, and crudeness. We typically carried grain from Fort William, Ontario, and Duluth, Minnesota, down to Buffalo because it was the year before the Seaway, the big Seaway. As you probably know, the Welland Canal was built, the first one in the 1830s, so ships could get in from the ocean as early as the 1830s. But Buffalo was the big terminus for the grain, and then by barge down the canal to New York City, and then off to Europe. And then after ~59, Buffalo was devastated. All the grain went to Europe on the St. Lawrence Seaway. So I then, after 2 years, said, I'm ready for college. I want to go to college.
And was that your choice to take
that? Was my choice.
Interesting.
I thought I might want to try to be a captain but the 2 years before the mast was enough for me to learn so much that I really wanted to study water and wildlife. So I searched for a college, and it's when I see the kids today struggling for enrollment in so many colleges. I was the first college I picked. They just said, okay, come on in, you had good background. So it was the University of Michigan, and I had the best experience there. I loved my professors. Two of them were the authors of so many books on aquatic science and fisheries, and then the public health school. So I was enrolled in the School of Natural Resources in Ann Arbor, and I was there for 4 years, met the greatest number of graduate students that were also our mentors. and was available to great field trips through Michigan and the Great Lakes area. Sort of dovetailed with my experience on the ship. I'd been to all the lakes and a lot of ports on these lakes, and always admired the water and was amazed by the water quality as you left Lake Erie. Anyway, the success of these people in rounding me out was evident because I did well enough to be invited to do a fellowship, a combined fellowship that was then the U.S. Public Health Service. That became the EPA in 1972. The Public Health Service wanted to get young people from universities into water research for the upcoming development of regulations to deal with water pollution. You remember, this was just before Cleveland's Cuyahoga River caught fire for the 30th time in its history. And so there was money to develop programs and get students in them to get prepared for taking over these kind of roles. And that's where I really, admired the people that I work with so well. And I did work on the effects of detergents. At that time, the harsh detergents that came from a formula called alkyl benzene sulfonate, which was the standard base for so many dish detergents and laundry detergents. And it had caused foaming in waste treatment plants in the 1950s. You may have heard where on a windy day, this chemical that didn't break down in the waste treatment would billow into foam the height of houses, and then a wind would carry it off location, rolling down the countryside across lawns. And so something had to be done. And so a huge effort came to set up what became the standard for water quality standards, which is for wildlife, bioassays. Excuse me.
And it sounds like the folks at the University of Michigan were at the forefront of that work.
Right. So I had a fellowship. It required you to be there for 2 years, take 50 extra hours of credit. You stay a full year, you got your books paid for and your dwelling, your tuition. And excuse me, at the end of it, you were offered opportunities in a number of water research areas that were basis for water management policy in the government. It also had invitations for Canadian work, which to me attracted because there was work opening up in a place I'd never been in Canada, Newfoundland. So I was married after graduation. We had a baby and we moved to St. John's, Newfoundland in the 1967. And I was working with a number of people in Canadian fisheries on what became a sad venture called pre-impoundment surveys for the Churchill Falls power development. I'm sure some of the electricity we have here today is from that development. It is the mega power development up in Labrador, between Labrador and Quebec, and is in conjunction with the Shefferville mine for iron ore, the Pecans Mather Cleveland mining. So our job was to fly out with a crew and do a impoundment survey of rivers that were going to be captured by this huge development. In effect, Canada would pick off rivers that in the topography of Labrador were easily backed up into the main flow called the Churchill River, and then all of that water would tumble down 220 feet through something like a dozen huge draft tubes the size of this room to generate the megawatts that were followed. And that development, this is just before they started actual construction. So we'd fly into these remote places and set up a camp and did this at the time that the Atlantic salmon was running. So I got to see this magnificent fish before and realized that originally it in the colonial references could have been in the Susquehanna River, and which means Chesapeake Bay drainage. And then, of course, all the way up the Delaware, the Hudson, huge salmon runs when people came. But they were so common. You remember the English law that prevented managers from serving their indentured servants salmon more than twice a week. So it was hard to believe. But in any case, this background, the grant that was for that job changed. Our job was to survey a river and write a report that made an economic value for the aquatic life in that river to the province or to Canada, and then that money that was estimated for the value was put over as a liability to the Power Commission. So they were to transfer value over to the fisheries where they could make a compensation. For example, maybe out west in British Columbia, sockeye salmon were compromised in a river by a dam and they built a spawning channel, things like that. But to see these rivers that were going to be literally dried up for the power set more urgency in my mind than probably anything.
That was going to be my question. Was this plucking at the conservationist heartstrings that you had about seeing these virgin rivers and knowing that they would be forever altered?
You could not imagine. When they've talked about you could walk across the backs of salmon. I saw something like that in the eastern value. You never had Atlantic salmon like sockeye in British Columbia or Alaska, but this beautiful fish, I don't know. It would have been a privilege for anybody to see them. I did go fishing one day, sports-wise, to get one, and it took 10 line breaks to get one, and we ate it. And it was a celebration of this beautiful fish, and to think that had been even in Lake Ontario watersheds before the canals and so forth. All of this added up. We've lost all this, or we're losing all this. We've got to do something that just at least holds onto a modicum of these things. So when I got back after the Newfoundland work, which was almost 3 years, the vessel that took us from Sydney, Nova Scotia, over to the Newfoundland, Port-au-Basque, after we had gotten back in the spring of 1968, which when I came here, she sank. It was an ice-breaking vessel. It was what they call slob ice. It was melting sea ice in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and coming across to Sydney, we would part these huge chunks of ice. The next year, she foundered in doing just that. They opened up some seams and it went down. The William Carson sank, and nobody was lost. It was easy to get them off. But that was an adventure in itself. I get back and I tendered a job here, William Sheely. I was assigned to the Future Scientist program with, Segedy was before me, right?
No, Russ Hansen was before you.
Russ Hansen, and then yes, Russ went to Western Research, right? So I picked up on that and simply continued the kind of ideas that I had as a kid. I know kids would I love this stuff. Maybe that if we take them to the right places where these lessons are provided, they'll really catch on to it. And so that began that odyssey for me, visiting things off on my favorite area was the Grand Rivers lands. And then a trip to Pennsylvania, an overnight trip to a place called Minister Creek in the Allegheny National Forest. And there we literally studied everything in a creek. We brought water back to do microbiology. We looked at invertebrate animals. And we brought back some trout, again, brook trout, that were about 3 inches. and with making slides of their scales, determined that they were close to 9 years old. That a fish like this brook trout could miniaturize in such a small, relatively unproductive cold-water stream. Mm-hmm. And yet I had seen them in Labrador and Newfoundland and in Quebec, 5, 6 pounds. Mm-hmm. So that was another kind of a anecdote to the main line, which is the fish becoming a symbol. So that often used term of a canary in the coal mine. The brook trout, when I found out at the time I was at the museum that they had been in Ohio. I was aware of the Ohio Fish Book by Troutman,
yeah.
that specifies that they were in Geauga County and there was a stream, and which doesn't mean that they weren't in a lot of other streams that he didn't visit. My father, as a child, one of the places they lived was in Conneaut because of the lake shipping, and he and his brothers would go up, I guess with some travel, up the Conneaut River to a place called Furnace Run. Are you aware of it? Furnace Run was a brook that really started in Pennsylvania and came into because it's right on the border. That's where they would catch brook trout. He knew very much about them. So they were in Furnace Run in the Conneaut River. So Kirtland didn't see all of them. He couldn't have. They couldn't, and Troutman couldn't either. Troutman said he went everywhere, but whatever that means, you hit a spot on a stream. And also seasonal. Some of these streams would be seasonal with the trout. But there was no doubt that most of the habitat that had the trout, referred to by Kirtland in the 1830s and 40s, had been compromised by land development. Mostly farming in those days and logging. I heard a figure, I can't substantiate it, I don't know who can, but they said by 1840, close to 75% of the forests in Ohio had been cut, or once. So knowing that our clay soils, especially in the north here with these glacial material, these clay lenses like we have at university school, I'll get to that at some point about how that served for our research on brook trout habitat. But these clay soils, plowed, removed of root penetration of trees, led to muddy creeks. Then the outright channelization of creeks to get to lower water tables for farm fields that were flooded periodically. In effect, we just had a war against the kind of habitats that not just brook trout, but so many types of wildlife that need water, wetlands, and the wetlands that moderate flood flows in streams. The draining of these wetlands did a terrible job with causing violent changes in flow in creeks after rain.
So you were, going back to your time with the future scientists here at the museum, you were basically trying to take these high school kids and give them kind of the experience that you had when you were at Gilmore, and these other experiences you had, taking them to places where they could see less disturbed nature.
Yeah.
And places like Minister Creek where actually you could still find, a pristine stream.
That's it. So it takes me to the time I had the offer from university school. I would give tours of school groups through the museum periodically. Mm-hmm. And one group came in from university school with a geology-based teacher named Cosmo DiBiasio. Cosmo was a great geologist. He loved his work, and he brought a class from university school, and he took me aside and said, we're building a new campus out in Hunting Valley, because at that time the whole school was at Shaker. Would you be interested in looking into a teaching job there in biology? I said, I'm interested in looking in anything. So I got a call from then headmaster Roland McKinley, and I remember his words. He said, "How would you like to do some real teaching?" So I I said, well, I'm challenged. I don't know what you mean by real teaching. I thought I was doing it where I am now. But he said, well, we would like to talk to you. So we went out and he offered this thing. He said, I had sent him my background. And he said, with your background and another man that I'm thinking about, this new campus needs a natural resource inventory to see how many things that are on our forests now, 229 acres of land, about 150 of it in old growth beech maple forest, what we could do with that for classes, either bringing stuff in or taking classes out. Boy, that sounds great. Okay, so I show up September 1970. The building is brand new. The landscape's pretty bare and rough. A pond had been built with the spoils from leveling the athletic fields. And as I recall, it's something like 230,000 cubic yards of soil was moved to make a dam across the ravine there, which was impounding a stream. So they got the permit to do it, and this dam is, as many know, is a very large feature there. It backed up the stream to a height that then reached to a spillway, and then below the spillway, through the dam, a tunnel, and then out into the lower valley that goes into the Chagrin River. So when I started, another man who I miss very much, named John Massey. John was just out of Vietnam, and he was in great athletic shape, and McKinley wanted us to combine forces. I was sort of the farmer, and John was going to be the boot camp guy for kids. And it was the best marriage you could ever have. John took that forest, helped us inventory stuff, laid the plans with us to build a hatchery. The two resources that, of course, came right up to the surface after our search were maple syrup because of the forest composition, and they had a history of maple syrup production. You know, we could tell that. And then the trout, the possibility of working with fish because we had a pond. At that time, the trout was not in the picture, but it followed. And
was that was something that was important to you to have, with your formative experiences and having a fish hatchery generally, you had this vision of how you could involve that as a major asset for
great question,
educating the students?
Yeah, I would say directly, the experience I had at 10 years old at Madison with hatching fish that my mother brokered eggs of, I learned so much about not just the fish, but the water that fish requires and how to manage a small operation that could be expanded. And what it did for me to ask questions about ponds and streams, and then the background I got in college that augmented all this stuff and made it a deeper set of skills. I said, yeah, this would be great. If we could get this water, the creek, we have to measure the creek for a year, and then maybe we can come up with some answers. So the outlet of the dam was a perfect place to develop certain structures. Not just a hatchery, but also a hydro station, which is there. It was a series of projects with kids, including a pipe penstock that carried about 40 cubic feet a minute down to a turbine and a fall of 30 feet. So we could generate about 2 kilowatts of power. Like so many things that happen when the students go, sometimes the interest goes, plus an electrical generating station is not an amateur concern. You need consulting from engineers and permits and that sort of thing. So we have that on the back burner. We have a building, we have a student who, because of this project, had gone on to Case Western Reserve and for his senior project, built a cross-flow turbine that he gave to the school, the university school, before he went off to Alaska to do rural electrification. He said, when I come back, if this isn't installed, I'll take it back. Okay, so that prompted us to build a powerhouse, a small powerhouse, and the turbine was then connected by belts to a truck generator, and then from there went to a inverter to take the DC to the AC, and then a cable into the hatchery. And for about a month, we had power. And it was great. Then those guys went, and it sat there. The problem came in a cold winter. A valve, a gate valve was forgotten. Part of the pipe had filled. It was a PVC pipe. The ice broke it, and there it sits. So since then, we've been trying to generate more interest in kids to do these sort of things. So,
well, going back to the hatchery thing, did you have were you consulting with others about how you could develop a hatchery, or is this just, you were bringing your own experiences of what you could do given the scenario you had there at US?
Well, you have to know that at the time I started at university school, a family friend, my time in Canada had made some friends, and one of them, Bob Passmore, who was with the government, was an investor in a private hatchery in the town of Bury, Quebec, which is just north of Vermont, about an hour north of Vermont. There's Sherbrooke, and then Lennoxville, then Bury. Bury was this classic little French-Canadian town with a big central church and a beautiful brook, the Bury Brook. And the company that Bob Passmore told us about was producing tremendous number of brook trout for the stocking of Quebec trout lakes in clubs. You may know that the Napoleonic law of Quebec, which was different than Ontario and the United States, gave the management of that vast country. They realized that a game warden walking from a federal purse just couldn't do anything. So they made fishing and hunting clubs and outlined areas where you could have an exclusive camp, 3 or 4 lakes. And what was want in those days was you had a central hatchery somewhere that kept those lakes because they were heavily fished. And in those days, there was not much question about hatchery as a management tool for fisheries. Today, there's a big one. So Passmore's hatchery raised about 3 to 11 million eggs a year. And he said, why don't you bring your kids up here? That would be a great thing. He said, you're interested in developing something at the school. He had come and visited us. So we went up, and I was so impressed with this operation. And he said, your kids can stay in this house, it's a wood-fired stove, and they can cook and catch your trout in the holding pond somewhere, have them clean the fish, cook. We went through all this stuff kids could do. First of all, touch a fish. So we got up, for the first year, we combined a trip to the Adirondacks and had the best experience with a guy named Gary Randorf, who was then with what's called the Adirondack Council. He had kind of he was an ombudsman for conservation in the Adirondack Park. And their nature centers, which were several around the edge of the park, I got a hold of him, and he said, I'll give your students a seminar with a meeting at one of our nature centers. So this became a pattern for about 10 years. We could go with a group, meet Gary Randorf, have a great, like in a room like this, in a beautiful nature center, and with some slides about the park's history, and then questions about what their education was and what it meant, the history of the park, how it was one of the first to put aside land to protect watersheds. You got a really good experience there. And this is the end of October, and sometimes we run into some heavy snow. And then down off the crest of the high country there and down into St. Lawrence Valley and over to the Bury. And then when we got there that night, the kids were allowed to go and seine the brood stock. What pools were separated, males and females. These huge brook trout that they had that subsequently became the strain that was in Sulphur Springs. It's called Clone Group 1 by Dansman, the fish geneticist in Guelph.
We'll return to that.
We'll return to that.
So the nature of this thing, though, this was like for 10 years an annual thing, like,
right?
Like over
annual
fall
thing.
break, or you could take a group out of regular classes
yes.
for this, like week-long?
We'd leave on a Thursday, and we'd drive to Utica, New York, and then up to Old Forge, which was that would be a 10-hour drive with a van. We could do that. And then we were at what they call the Adirondack Wood Camp, and we know the manager there was really enjoyed us. He ran a winter camp for cross-country ski training for the Olympics, and kept several cabins open. And again, we took our food, we had a cook, and each of these stops, we'd discuss a topic. Like what about the Adirondacks? And tomorrow you're going to have this seminar with Mr. Randorf, and it was great. And kids were assigned to clean dishes and cook. And for a lot of these kids, they're very used to camps from university school, so they fit in very well for doing this. And then the next day after that, we got to the hatchery. We had a meeting with the operator, qui parlait en français toute la journée if you want, but if you want to speak in English, that's too. But so kids that had taken some French, he would honor them. He never, he'd always encourage them. And his name was Giroux, and he showed them how to strip a fish and how to inseminate the eggs. And you have to picture this. The hatchery basement, the whole basement of the residence was a hatchery. Outside were all the pools and ponds and running water. It was a waterworks. It was just great. You could study flow patterns. He went over things like siphoning and vacuum and physical things. And then we would go on Saturday night after these kids had gathered the brood stock that we're going to strip. And we actually stripped fish for him for his total egg production, which is contracted with these clubs. And I'll never forget, the routine would be put on raincoats, and you're down in this cold basement, water running everywhere. The fish had been placed in these holding pools in the basement, and so he'd get a kid and set him down on a cobbler's bench, where your legs are over this way and there's a surface here, and there was a depression there for these bowls, or those kitchen soup bowls, take eggs. And right next on each side was a card table frame with Rochelle knit nylon netting, very soft. And right over here is the female pill. She's like, okay, Billy, go get a female, and this big fish, and then throw it in the frame, which had a belly in the net, so the fish could flop. And Giroux would constantly pour water on the net, so it stayed wet, so it didn't hurt the fish thing. He showed them the first step. Then the male went to the other side. It was just a production thing that was just amazing. When the fish stopped flopping, the head was tucked here under the armpit with the raincoat, and then holding the fish, the caudal peduncle or the tail area, by raising that if the female's ready, and you press an area where there's a nerve plexus on the belly, she discharges the eggs all by herself. The kids thought you'd squeeze her like toothpaste. No, she will do it on her own. And you cannot believe how rewarding that trip is, just to see kids like this. And as a secondary backstop, they would have a net by the student's elbow, so as the fish would and it wouldn't go on the floor. And then the fish was put back, and he'd get it again. And these fish put up with us. And pretty soon, within an hour, I want to try that, you know. It was amazing. I've got, there's so many pictures of that, you know, a kid holding this big fish, he's gonna test. It's called stripping, yeah. You know, when we take the eggs. So bowl after bowl were filled with these eggs. Then the male was taken, and similar process. The semen is put on it and mixed, and then water's added. They're set aside. We had this assembly line of bowls in different stages of water hardening the eggs. And then before we went to bed, the eggs were all put on this big screen set in a running water. And the next day they were going to be put on the incubation screens by the other people because we had to go. So we did this. We arrived we went Thursday, we got to the Adirondack camp. Friday, we had the meeting with Randorf. Friday night, we were at Bury and had a fish dinner. Kids got oriented to their residence. That night, they went out and seined the 2 pools. The next morning, all day, stripping fish. And then, for our fee, he gave us all the eggs we wanted. And they had been fertilized, and we put them in the carrying frames, which was pretty standard. Cardboard box lined with a plastic bag, and what looked like the frames you use for a beehive and honey, and simply a frame with a screen bottom, and then cheesecloth, soft cheesecloth would place in the water. He would scoop out eggs, and then by volume measure them. They showed the boys how to take 10 eggs and measure how many eggs per milliliter, how many eggs in a mill. And so they measured this out like you were doing a chemistry test. So we come back with about 40,000 eggs. Eggs were poured into cheesecloth, folded over in a frame, set in the box. The bottom frame was empty. Stack these up until you have your carry. Then the top frame, shaved lake ice. And then it was closed. And it was just a cardboard box. You put it in. We had gotten, in those days, the only thing we pursued was federal fisheries import regulations. So their hatchery had to be certified as disease-free. They complied, and so we got this permit, which we had to renew every year. And that was a lot of work to do that, but it was worth it. And we get to the border, and sometimes we'd have an agent say, what do we got here? And then he'd hey, Bill, it looks like we're going to have caviar for dinner. You know? And the kids would, no, those are our eggs. Then we after a 12-hour drive, sometimes 14, and then how about the blizzard of 77, 78? November, there was a first blizzard. We spent, it took 23 hours to get from Rochester to Cleveland in a caravan. However.
What an extraordinary experience. Were these trips pretty well subscribed? Did you have a full load of
Oh, yes,
students?
yeah. And the preference was given to kids in biology, my biology class. But we'd have kids from other classes, and we were limited to 6 to 7 for a van.
Right.
Well, you know, we didn't have a bus. We had a 7-passenger van.
So over 10 years, you've got this great setup now where you can bring in these eggs, and you have a thriving hatchery and fishery operation. First question is then, what was the fate of the fish you raised? And the second question is, when did you start getting into our native brook trout?
Okay, well, that's really good. About, let's see, probably 1977, 78, I happened to live next door to Tom Stanley. I met him by being a neighbor. Oh, you're at university school, he said. Yes, and I'm at Metro Park, and I, you know, do you ever, and you teach biology, do you ever bring kids over for field trips? And I said, yeah, I've been over several times in North Chagrin. Well, he said, I understand, through conversation that you have some interesting projects like a fish hatchery. And I said, yeah, we work with hatching fish. We use the eggs as an embryology class in biology. And he said, Metro Parks has something like 18,000 acres of land in the Emerald Necklace. Would you ever think about looking for streams in these parks that could hold the trout, or had historically held the trout, and maybe they're able to be refurbished? Right on. So we had, and we only had one student in this, but in the summer, I think 77, 78, he and I traipsed through all the Metro Parks. It was a great experience. It's before the national park was declared, and we agreed that the two streams, one was far away, that's the one at Hinckley, which was then, I think, a new park. It was a new part of the Metro. But then when we got back to Sulphur Springs was it. It was not only a beautiful valley, you've been there, the Hemlock Gorge, and it left the park, unfortunately, going westward up towards Somme, but it wasn't overdeveloped. There was an airfield that sort of protected a lot of land around the headwaters. This was before the maximum housing development that was going on then. And one branch, the north branch, was had a blown out dam that had been built years before. And as the dam had been silted up, the stream had cut a channel through really low sediment, very fine sediment. And except for high flow periods, that stream was gin clear. It was just as clear as spring water, which it was mostly spring water. So we followed with a summer measurement of temperatures and everything. So that became the target for these Quebec brook trout, clone group 1, which you'll talk about later. And that also cemented the relationship between Tom Stanley and me for this project of getting kids to work on a stream.
And this was a formal relationship then between University School and Cleveland Metro Parks?
Right.
Okay. And the relationship with Ohio Department of Natural Resources at this time?
No, we had not pursued that.
Okay.
We didn't know about the native trout now. There were so many things that, we would take up hours to go over all the different experiences in developing the hatchery thing. But in the stream that actually feeds our hatchery is not suitable for trout because of substrate. It's mostly a clay basin. The stream the channel actually cuts through a clay bed. And during it can, in the summer, for instance, it can just look like rain. Coffee with cream is coming downstream. And this became now, in the last few years, a real challenge to see, to test some of the published limits that this fish can handle and at what point in their life cycle, reproduction, feeding, overwintering.
In terms of temperature or in terms of water chemistry and siltation?
Everything. Okay. Temperature, chemistry, sediment load, mostly sediment load. So the last 2 summers have cemented our idea that this stream that we've studied a lot of, we have very much on it. It's almost intermittent in some dry years. It's almost intermittent. The basin is 129 acres above the pond, and the section of stream that's on our property is developed for holding trout. And later on I'll tell you about a student who's now a veterinarian student in Ohio State who developed with me an expanded box, like in that paper, the box that shows the silt lifting hydraulic box that brought off trout in the mud hole. So we were successful, and we're trying to get this published in the American Fisheries Society Journal. Charlie's taken over. That's his paper. It was his graduate paper for university school, and some people have seen it. It's a big poster. They have to do poster presentations, and it's clearly presented on the wall where I work at school, describing what happened. 23 trout came out of this small section of stream that was hydraulically modified
by Charlie's structure.
Which allowed them to survive where they probably would not have.
Right. But after they're hatching, now they're fry. Now that's another level of thing. So lastly, we've been using an enormous plunge pool below a culvert that is wooded on both sides to hold trout. When we're in the process of building a new hatchery. It's 50 years almost. That's another story in itself. Getting that stuff out of below the dam. So we had brood fish in the hatchery, and we either put them in the pond and let people fish for them, or they disappear, like so many of them in the pond anyway. But this pool, this plunge pool upstream from the pond, seemed attractive to test the theory that we could hold large fish over summer and still have reproductive success. So I'm referring to, most of the literature refers to temperatures Celsius close to 24 degrees, which is called, wonderful word, incipient lethal level. It means if you stay there for a long time, you're in trouble. But we approached 22 degrees in the summer, but we found, ironically, as the flow goes down in the creek in dry weather, it gets colder. This pool gets colder. And it's obvious that's groundwater. So as rainy periods come, there'll be a spike in temperature. So we've got hydraulic measurements on this stuff. It's really interesting. And the fish have stayed. I intentionally fed them to induce interest in staying in the pool. And I told George that yesterday was one of the best days in outdoor projects. We had tried to figure, how are we going to get, this pool is half the size of the room and 7 feet deep below the plunge from the culvert. So how are we going to get these fish out with a seine? We built a seine years ago, a big seine that is 6 foot in depth, 30 feet in length, and we put leads and floats on it. And it's big enough to go in that pool, but there's tree roots sticking out of the bank. Plus, it's over waders. You'd go over your head. The center of the pool is about 7 feet. But there is a ledge along the high wall from the culvert. We know they'll build a concrete wall to house the culvert. And there's a ledge that goes along and allows you to just sneak along that ledge to get across the stream. A student's waiting on the bank. You hand the lead line and the float line to him on this side, the person on this side. You stay on the side, right close to the bank. Sometimes you have to hold on to roots to not go over your head. And you're kicking as you go ahead of the net. When they get to the end of the pool, there's 2 or 3 people there. We grab the brails and start pulling and pursing the net. Well, we kept catching rocks, especially at the tail end of the pool. Flood flows in that creek have pushed Devonian shale up in plates like this, that if you step on them, I mean, you're going to go down. So it presented all sorts of challenges. Kids love this stuff, poking around. One fell in yesterday, but we did a shot, and it got hung up on rocks. And then the worst thing is with the seine, you lift it, away they go. So I said, come on, we'll try one more time. Come on, we know where the snags are. So we did it. It pursed, and man, we got 4 fish, 2 males and 2 females. And we have a live box floating there, and we put them in. There was a photographer from development at the school, and he just had a good time photographing. One male brook trout says everything about the beauty of these fish. You know, it's all colored up in the fall. Well, the 2 females were not totally ripe, but they gave early eggs. And that's filmed, and we have the insemination of the eggs, and then, breaking up and going back to the school, where they will be incubated now. The hatchery is in a lab. And that lab, before they built the new science wing, we were asked as teachers, is there anything that you would like in these labs that are something that augment what you do or complement what you do. And right away I said, God, this thing is right by the pond. Yes, we could get pond water into the lab. What? Pond water into the lab? Yep. We'll put a submersible pump in the lake, and now that the building is going to be built, we could trench and get a pipe right to that lab spot. They did it. They put the line in. We're at a 12-foot elevation above the pond on the floor. You come into the lab, you have deionized water, you have cold Cleveland water, Lake Erie, warm Cleveland water, pond water, and it works. And the pump is in the lake. If you, it's in a cage on a pole. The cage is with a winch, hand winch. You can bring it up, clean it, but it's setting in 2 meters of water. And that is itself another thing for monitoring water quality. Students and teachers say, we don't have time to go out. Okay, we'll bring the lake to you. And we did. We brought the lake in, and now, without a hatchery, that lake water, which was used to hatch the eggs at the hatchery, at 2 meters, by this time of year now, we're at 12 degrees Celsius, which is way into the, in fact, we incubate eggs, that's why our incubation is so long, at around 5 degrees Celsius, under the ice. So we will have ice cover, but the water will be coming into the lab. One of the students I have now has built a model of the successful hatchery unit that's successful in the stream. And it will both illustrate what the stream works is for other people to see how it works, plus it will hatch these eggs, and then periodically through the development they go into the class with a microscope and a camera, and we project the development of the embryo. I'm telling you, Harvey, that there is nothing that this project produces that is more produced gasps when people see the beauty of a trout alvin fry with a yolk sac on a special dish under a microscope with a camera and projected on the big screen. And with the new resolution, you can literally see, you've got to come to see this when we do it. Blood, you can see blood cells bumping along in capillaries. Plus, you could drill down on any, at that size, most of their tissues are translucent. And you can drill down on kidneys or the digestive tract. You can see the heart pumping. As a fry, most of the blood goes around the yolk sac. You've seen them, I'm sure. But I don't know if you've ever seen them like this with a microscope.
No, I have not.
And the heart, boom, boom. That's a 2-chambered heart. And you see perfect circulation. You can trace it exactly with the objective lens. You can just track the whole thing on this fry. So as he develops through the winter, it's a perfect coordination with the timing for the school year. So by the time the fry is there, that'll be now. Yesterday we got eggs. If you've ever seen a freshly deposited trout or salmon egg, they look like these vitamin D capsules. It looks like a clear vitamin capsule. You don't see any definition, just amber sphere. When I go back today, which would be 24 hours, there'll be a dot. If they're fertile, there'll be a dot. And if you take that egg and put it on, it's called the blastomere. That's the beginning of the development. So every week you can follow. You think embryology textbooks are cool with these pictures that they have in there. They're rather grainy. But here you can actually see the major tissues take form and the symmetry develop.
Of the living animal.
Of the living animal. And you can put them back. So there is a period of real delicacy. It's about, depending on temperature, 10, 20 days, where if you bump them, or certainly light, sunlight is lethal to them. It's amazing. That's why they're buried in the stream. They're buried in gravel. They're away from UV. UV is very destructive to them. So The big thing this year is, are these eggs going to give a healthy fry? Because the literature claims as you approach this upper level of tolerance, reproduction is either postponed or the eggs are not healthy. So we'll see.
So we want to get you to tell the story about the native brook trout strain, but
Okay.
But just what you've done just now is give us this wonderful picture of a culture of innovation, a culture of research, of student-based research and involvement, which is unprecedented. Can you think of other schools or other places that have this level of
I know
involvement?
Hawken, the private schools try to do this. It's hard because of the national emphasis on standardized testing and standardized experiences. And this kind of education has, it's never been challenged as being not important. But to find time for it, it gets harder and harder. So I know public schools are stuck with field trips maybe. We've had lots of public schools come out to see the hatchery, and we'll go over, even when we have about a 2-week period where you can get fish to yield eggs. And we have a standard presentation that goes over biology and everything. Its uniqueness is not, we're not unique anymore. There is a school in Petaluma, California, where the state of California actually built them a state-of-the-art hatchery for coho salmon and steelhead trout, which are native in this river. And it's a sulfur springs of the West Coast. It is. They are rebuilding this, but their hatchery is, I mean, it was $1 million installation. And it's supervised by the state, but the school uses it for education. There's another hatchery, I think, in Colorado now, and I'm out in contact with the men. The one in California I've seen, and students do run it. They have students who work different days there, the routine of maintaining populations and stuff.
Clearly, you are ahead of the curve here.
Well,
sounds like yours was the
it was there, and
Well, and can you just speak to the impact? Because now you've been with US for
49.
49 years, okay? And so many thousands of students have come under your influence. You have been able to mentor through these projects. And I know, one we talked earlier about Doug Smith, who leads the wolf restoration project in Yellowstone. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the other students who you have mentored that are now,
Well, some of them, U.S. is interested in getting students in successful positions everywhere they go. Right now, the interest in science is leading to medicine. The school has an incredible project that cooperates with UH hospitals and the Cleveland Clinic. So we have kids who get to join on research projects in cancer and everything. And then they make poster presentations. So they've really upped the level of exposure of kids to research at levels that some people would question, the preparation. I mean, you're in high school, you're not in postdoctorate medicine. But they learn tremendous things with these cooperating doctors. We have a teacher there who is got a PhD in wildlife science, Sarah Lau, Dr. Sarah Lau. She is great with kids in the ecology course. She is she loves mammals. She got her PhD in studying mammals. And she has got a network of cameras around catching wildlife pictures. At a coyote program a few years ago, tracking coyotes in the area. Right now, she's interested in mink that are photographing these pools with the trout, because the mink come down. The mink do get the trout. There's no doubt about it.
I was about to say they're not a friend to your hatchery program.
Oh, I want fish in certain places so she can get these things. It's a nice, but again, she is excellent at getting kids into projects, but she has the same problem everybody has in schools now. Takes a lot of outdoor time to do these projects, and times have changed. So U.S. does a fantastic job of making time available where it is, and maybe Saturdays, but aside from COVID, when COVID isn't around, we got Saturdays that we do certain things. So there's a way to get around the hurdles. But you wanted to talk about the native trout.
Right. So, I mean, there's a great story here about
yes,
a
it
native
is. It's a serendipity story.
So let's hear about that.
I was just finishing up a class in the biology class at the school. It was around 78. Maybe it says there. Scott Schubert shows up. Yeah.
1984.
1984. I have trouble with the 70s and the 80s. Anyway, I knew from, like you did, that Kirtland and Garlick and Ackley, actually Ackley had a fish farm, the first fish farm in North America.
Really?
You know that? There's a plaque at 155th and Ackley. You've got to go there. There's a plaque. It says, "What is?" You've seen it, and you know who brokered it is Krems, and he got a professor who is a fish historian from Colorado, Robert Benke, to come as a guest of the museum a few years ago. Do you ever remember? Robert Benke has a beautiful textbook on the trout and salmon of North America. And beautiful color plates, correct? Oh, if you don't have it, I'll bring mine next time I see you. It is spectacular. 70 different varieties of trout and salmon. I mean, it is the most beautifully comprehensive book I've ever seen. Anyway, so there was a well-known that at least in the history we had trout, and I knew from my father, Furnace Run and Conneaut. So I was happy with this Quebec trip, bringing us eggs, and then we could do work with them. So all of a sudden I'm at this class, and so in those days we didn't have a computer. It was just starting. Somebody came to the door and said, there's a guy on a motorcycle down on the loading dock area, wants to talk to you. Oh, I don't know, a motorcycle. So I went down, and there was a stranger, young guy, nice guy, introduced himself as Scott Schubert. I'm from Chardon area. And, oh, good. He said, I understand you work with trout. I said, I do. And he said, well, I do too. I have a pond in my backyard, and I have trout. They're kind of pets. I went to the Chagrin Pet and Garden store, which is a feed store as well as a hardware store, and wanted to buy some trout feed. The man there said that they only can sell in 40-pound bags, 50-pound bags. I can't get that on my bike. Of course not. So he said, oh, there's a guy at university school that buys trout food from us named Harmon. If you go over there, maybe he could give you enough for your pets. So that's what it was. He came for some fish food. I said, oh, you have trout. I said, rainbow trout? Because, that's what most people think of because that's what they're allowed to see. Oh, no, brook trout, native trout. And he used the word native. I said, this guy knows something. So come in. And we talked. He said, I don't know what the big brouhaha is. They're all over the place out where I live. What? I said, where do you live? He said, well, I'm off of Mulberry Road in Geauga County. And there's a stream there that's one of the branches of the Chagrin. I forget what it is. But in any case, it goes through this Sharon conglomerate again, which is that high spring yield. That sounds like it. So I said, I'll give you all the feed you want if you show me where you get them. Okay, come on. School was over. I followed him on the bike, went to his house, saw his pond. Indeed, he had these beautiful brook trout. So then we went down into the creek where he got the fish to start the pond. And they were all over the place. You know, all sizes. And most of them small. I was speechless. He said, well, this isn't the only stream. There's other streams too. Show me. So this led to this odyssey. And the big one was this one called Springbrook, which is the icon of the Division of Wildlife. But he took me there. It was tributary to Bass Lake in Chardon, as well as there were a couple other streams that were tributary that had them. And we saw them. And I said, who manages this land? You know, it was in a gorge. There were private homes, small cottages. So he said, oh yeah, this is owned by, I think it was American Fork and Hoe Company of Ashtabula, had bought this property, this huge property around these creeks, as a retirement community for their employees. So they were offering real estate for either summer homes or cottages and things. So he said, well, there's a land office here. There's a guy there. So I went and met him. And I just introduced myself and told him what I was interested in. Oh, go study this. Sure, come study the stream. Do whatever you want. Let me know what you find. That's what started it. And we had students that I put on this detail, one of whom works for the school in the alumni office. They went to this place called Woody Brook, and got a huge trout with a net. So much history has happened since then. Woody Brook was threatened by a development, and it was saved through the brokerage of a couple of people, one of which was Steve Madewell, right? You know, the Woody Brook thing. Before they had to mitigate the stream that had been compromised by pre-development, they were going to make ponds on it and everything. It was full of these little trout. So we had followed it all the way down to where it goes into the main. There was a big stream. Unfortunately, that one had come straight from the east off a golf course in Chardon. And that was the end of it, you know, chemicals. And yet this little stream, which was still pristine, the lower part was total forest, watershed protected. It was a natural to aim for restoration or maintenance. So you may know there was a restoration project by a company out of Columbus that did stream remediation. I think his name was Steve Phillips. Came in there and rebuilt the damaged upper stream. And today they're in there. And the other stream is under protection of Division of Wild
Natural areas and preserves.
Natural areas. You can't go there like we did. Mm-hmm. We went there several times. Meanwhile, remember, at this time, Sulphur Springs we're running the Sulphur Springs Trout Project with the Clone Group 1.
With Clone Group from Quebec, your
right.
Quebec stock, right?
So at this time, a student with his civic duty wrote the state. Unbeknownst to me, he wrote the Division of Wildlife, and his name was James Odeski. And loved the guy. He was just on fire with this, and you wanted to know other people that did things with this. He wrote this really urgent letter, you know, that, hey, we found these fish that are in the historical literature, and they're hanging on by their toenails. Will you join with us to somehow expand this and save these fish? Wow, you know, he showed me the letter. I said, okay. But let's see what they say. Well, a letter came back. The first letter came back, and it complimented him and University School for their conservation concerns. But they, in researching their records, realized that in the 1880s and so forth, there was a lot of importation of salmon and trout around the country from places where they were native to where they were not native. And they said that these brook trout were no doubt from Michigan or Cortland, New York. Okay, that's what you think. So we had not had any discussion of what became known as genetic fingerprinting. So James, being the good Samaritan he is for this whole project, finds this guy through the literature who's up at Guelph, Ontario, who's probably the world expert on salmon and trout genetics. And he was doing a survey of all the different varieties of brook trout across the country. And James called him and he said, Ohio, I forgot Ohio. You might, yes, right, you're on Lake Erie. You must have, we have them in the Grand River of Ontario, which is off by Long Point on the North Shore. Yeah. They're in there. And they, we have them up to the headwaters, which then jumps into the Algonquin Park watersheds. So Dansman said, can you get some of these fish? So we get back to you. We went to Don Tincher at the land office at not the state of Ohio, and he said, sure, you could do that. So this letter that went to the state, they had found then that we had been working with brook trout, and they were very curious of under what authority were we working in the park, or Well, at that time, we assumed the authority was the park. They had autonomy over woods and waters. That was their management unit. Their position was, no, the state of Ohio is imperial on all waters, So that became kind of a red light about what might happen. Anyway.
Meaning they wanted you to cease and desist what you were doing with clone group number 1?
Right, and in fact, cease and desist with brook trout, period. Don't do anything with brook trout.
Were you doing about trying to propagate the native strain in your hatchery at this point?
No, not then.
Not then, okay.
But so the state went along with, we'll answer subsequent communication led to them agreeing to net a sample from the creek and send them to Dansman. We took them to Dansman. So I remember going over there with one of their biologists named Vince LeConte, who was a friendly guy, but he certainly didn't set policy for the Division of Wildlife. But he worked with us to catch these fish. It was nothing to take a seine in that creek and we took about 18 to 20 trout of different sizes, and they were gorgeous fish. Dansman told us how to do it. He said, just put ice in a big ice chest and throw them in whole, and then come up. It's only 5 hours. So you drive to Buffalo, you go up the Queens Highway up to Hamilton, and then it's just about an hour north of there. And he said, come up, you bring your students, we'll put them up for the weekend, they can check the college, we can stay at a dorm, he said, I want these fish. And we'll show you how we do genetic fingerprinting. So, wow, this is great. And we got a bus driver. I think we had 12 kids, 15 kids. Wanted to see this genetics lab. And up we go, and he is ecstatic. He's a very tall man, very gracious. Takes us right away into the lab, bring the fish in, and he said, we'll work on these right now. We'll get our first sample, and then tomorrow we'll show you the sequences. So we were hosted that night at the dorm. We had food. Next morning, breakfast, we come over, and just about the whole day we went through this lab and different researchers were showing us different things. It was totally new to us, you know. It was totally new to most people then. So Dansman's idea was, he was interested in, with a geologist, on how these trout could trace the post-glacial invasion of watersheds as they move north, as the ice retreats. So we left the fish with it, and he said, I'll call you. I won't write you. We'll call you as soon as we get a determination. So what is a determination? Well, they have unique alleles in their genetic makeup, and enough statistically significant enough different alleles that it could set them off as a separate either subspecies or population at least. So the call came to the school, you know, where's James? I want to talk to James. You do have a fish, a unique fish. And it turns out he's not unique just to Ohio. He's unique to a corridor. And that's the whole interesting thing. He said the refuge was probably West Virginia. Down there, that clone group is in West Virginia. And then he said, what's the most logical pathway is likely, look at the map. We got the Ohio River and the Kanawha rivers. Those are big rivers. Picture them in post-glacial time. God, the water that must have been. Now you have the at Marietta. You have the what's the
Muskingum?
the Tuscarora is north of that. Goes into it.
Is that Muskingum?
Muskingum.
Yeah.
So then up Muskingum, up Tuscarora, and then when you get to the Akron Summit Lakes. Mm-hmm. Begins the watersheds into the north to Lake Erie. So his premise is the most likely it'd be Lake. The Chicago Valley was a lake at the high stage when the Maumee stage, right? And guess what comes in as a major stream from the east? Tinker's Creek. And Tinker's Creek starts comes out of Aurora Lake. And of course, in those days, who knows how big they were. And then Aurora Lake begins the south branch of the Chagrin River.
Wow.
So they're into the Chagrin, and then they're into Lake Erie, and then through one route, and then into the streams all through the Lake Erie Basin and up through. So, you know, he does find them in several places. I think he said that they are in rivers north to the park, Algonquin.
Algonquin, okay. So this
And there
is
they
the
stop.
same strain as you then would find in southern Ontario,
Yeah,
north of
right.
Lake Erie. Yeah.
And this dovetails with a most recent report on post-glacial refuges for these fish. Labrador, there's been a big study, genetic study on the varieties of trout in Newfoundland and Labrador. There's so many varieties of brook trout. And they're separated by just a hill into a different watershed. They change rapidly and adapt to these bog ponds and these acid water bog ponds, and up in Labrador they get huge. So they're a very plastic fish as long as certain conditions are met. So he traces Labrador's source are to the Mississippi range, which is us, and the East Coast are what populated Quebec, northern Quebec and Labrador. So that was interesting, and whether or not they find the same clone group, I don't think so. They didn't mention all of the clone groups, but Dansman does. He mentions that the Ohio fish is not unique to Ohio. It can't be. I mean, it got here from somewhere else.
Right.
So,
But it wasn't put here.
You know, it wasn't put here.
But that
It was put here by itself.
It confirmed that it was in fact a native
Right.
strain. Yeah.
So once that got established that this was a unique fish, the Division of Wildlife became very interested, and then prompted meetings that would, steer the future of any management of this fish along their lines. And then came the Museum of Natural History's dinner meeting with.
So let's just talk about that, because this is now where the museum's trout club, and the trout club being composed of folks who are enthusiasts for cold water streams and fisheries and fellowship and all the rest of it. But they obviously were very interested in what you had been doing with brook trout, and I'm sure very interested in the Sulphur Springs thing. But now this is sort of a game changer where we now have a native fish, a threatened gene pool.
Exactly.
And so the museum's trout club was the convening agent to bring you together with the Division of Wildlife to start talking about the future of the.
And somewhere at this time, just preceding this meeting with the club, because the state, both of us knew these fish were native, we found a place that was a neutral, perfect place to raise these fish artificially at a private property in Waite Hill. It was on, it's called Spring Hollow. It was owned by, I forget, but now it's owned by a doctor, retired doctor from the clinic, and was I was introduced to the place through some students who knew about this pond that was spring fed. This estate is astonishing. It's on the east branch of the Chagrin River. It's on the escarpment of, it's on a big flat outwash plain. Mm-hmm. Tons of gravel at the base, and the estate had been built in the 1890s, and they had a spring house, a beautiful stone spring house, a quarter the size of this room, and lined with stone, and 3 sources of water coming in, plus springs coming out of the bank all along, falling into the East Branch. And on the end of the edge of the property, they built a small pond like we had had at Madison, same thing. And they had formalized this as a water garden. Water came out of the spring house through a rock bordered channel into a pool that looked like a swimming pool. It had steps down into it, but it was ice water. I don't know who could swim in it. The outlet was a standpipe that then led to the pond, and the pond then, which was dammed by a concrete barrier, was badly eroding, bad side. It was right on the precipice of this cliff leading to the East Branch, water cascading down the cliff. So, you know what a water ram is? It used to be, it was a pump that if you have a pressure head of water source up here, and it's just a little bit of water, and you feed this structure, it's a spherical structure, as it fills with water, it increases pressure.
Right. And
then that pressure from a pipe this big is reduced to a pipe the size of your finger, and that increase in pressure propagated in a smaller pool can pump water uphill. So it to a certain degree, and it's not a big flow, but it's a trickle. You can get water to a cistern up the hill. I mean, the farmers had used this for years where they have hilly country, called water ram. Anyway, there had been a water ram bound by next to the dam, and it was cracked. In other words, it long and rusted away. But the pipe leading to it came from up the spring, up the spring, that first pool. So the pressure head, there we had about a 12-foot pressure head. Mm-hmm. And there was a valve on there. Well, we got the valve open. It was a gate valve, and it was seized up and everything. But we got it open, but couldn't shut it. So we got it. We were able to get another valve, replace it, and now we could we could get water to a spot, a little terrace area. We built a hatchery for the native brook trout.
So this is in what year? So the brook trout were discovered in '84. So what year are you now?
We're 80, about 87.
Okay, and the Division of Wildlife is supportive of your effort?
Right. That was why we did it. Now we had no argument. They didn't like the fact that we had a hatchery at our school where we had been working with Quebec trout. And I said, there's no problem with separating them. You know, we even our hatcheries, you know, fish get mixed. And okay, so we pursued this, but it gave us another project. Now, this was 15 minutes from school. Now, this is another, again, we had time. We built a hatchery that used this water from the water ram pipe as a source, and it turned out beautiful. We had 2 tiers of hatchery troughs. A building, it was 14 by 8. It was right on the hillside. It looked like a, you know, it had a sloped roof, and it was really nice. We worked hard. We put windows in it, and the pipe came in to the side of the building, and then it was dispersed through 2 gate valves for each trough, and the water then went out to the end of the trough, went down a drain to a common drain, and then out to the brook. So then that necessitated getting a broodstock. And the largest trout that were in those creeks are like that. So again, a division representative went with us. I think we came up with something like 80 small fish.
So the division representative is with you, but you guys have built a
Right.
hatchery. You guys are actually collecting the fish.
Right.
You're really putting the whole thing together.
Yeah, we financed the whole thing.
Got it.
But you know, we're trying to build this relationship now. Things are going okay. By 2 years later, and kids would go there and feed. Watercress lines the bank of the creek coming into this pond. You know, and you could have a dinner of watercress taken. It was just a most beautiful place, and the hatchery worked great. The you know, water was flowing, ready for eggs. And we don't have eggs yet. So the pond, which probably had been built around the 1890s too, was so filled in with leaves. You go in there with waders, and I mean, you just sank in it. There was a deep area, maybe 7-8 feet. It was such cold water, it didn't matter if it was deep. Trees shaded it, it was safe. The doctor had told us that in the past he had had rainbow trout in there, but poachers would come all the time. He said, I can't keep fish here. So what are we going to do? You know, we're not going to post a sentry on the place. So the word, he thought, because there were no more fish in there for several years, that the word would be among these poachers. It's not worth going there. So we put these 80-some brook trout in there, and 2 years later, they were big. They really grew. They exploded. It was like the word was, oh, they're genetically stuck at this side. No, they sprung out just like brook trout everywhere. Up in Labrador, they got big. We fed them. The water was perfect. So I guess in 88, this fall, you could tell they were nosing up into the watercress creek. You know when they're interested in spawning.
Yeah.
So we went in there with a seine, and oh my God, how are we going to do this? It's like yesterday with rocks, now it's with mud. It's silt. Well, we got a ton of them up to the dam. And we're going along the side, another man on the other side, way over, and we get the net up there, purse it right next to the concrete wall, and the state was there, the state guy, and we were just overwhelmed by these beautiful fish. And we got a lot of eggs from them right away, right there at the dam, standing in water this deep, stripping fish. Kids are there. And then our first eggs, you'd imagine, go into the screens on this hatchery on the property. Oh, everybody's happy. So we go the next year. Something happened. I couldn't get there with kids. I couldn't get the bus or something. And I get there, and they're standing by their truck. You know,
Who?
the state people.
Oh, okay.
Arms behind their back, and they're upset because we're late. we knock off at such and such an hour. I said, well, we had a problem. So it was starting to get irritating to them, I guess, that you could tell it was not welcome.
Were they showing up for regular inspections of your?
I don't know. They never. They never really told us much about them revisiting the place. Okay. Although they were there when we stripped the fish and verified that. Due to partly Steve Madeswell and another one, a man named Bill Hudson, who was head of
Geauga Park District.
Right. Yep. Because Geauga had the streams and most of the Lake County, suitable streams. You live in an area where those streams were suitable. Mm-hmm. Prentice Creek, and in any case, Bill Hudson and Steve brokered what I call the Brook Trout Advisory Council. Sounds very prestigious, but it was an invitational for people that were interested in the trout. Division of Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service guy, there's Department of Interior, University School, and any other park personnel.
Yeah, Lake Metro Parks.
Right.
Metro. Was Tom Stanley still involved?
Right.
Okay.
To start.
Okay.
So at this one meeting, it was kind of a pre-celebratory meeting out at the park office for Geauga. People were sharing anecdotes about what they knew about trout, and the division was talking about, I don't know, we're off on, can't remember exactly what the exact words were, but Tom Stanley announced that there was a bumper crop of trout hatched in Sulphur Springs. And they knew that the trout originally came from the University School hatchery. So I remember these two guys from the state standing up, perturbed, and people, what's the matter? Oh, you mean they're reproducing? They had this picture that, like they do so many, they stock fish and then they have to come back and stock them for the pond, Here, the point was that we wanted to establish them there, and it was successful. So they went to the phone, came back, and then went thus to me, you will give up those fish at the hatchery, because then I had native fish at U.S. hatchery and at Sweet Hill. Got it? I had given up the Quebec strain in our hatchery.
Oh, okay.
But just the fact that they had been there, according to them, was bad enough.
Right.
You will surrender them. And this is before I met Krems.
And Peter Krems, who
right.
was board member of the museum, very active in the trout
right.
club. Okay.
Peter was our advisor and then helped us get some resolution about all these questions later. But at this time, I was, cowed by this. They were imperial, you will give up these fish, our fish. I said, what the? And it turns out I shouldn't have done what I did, but I surrendered all these fish to them, which they took. And that began the bitterness.
And so you were effectively fishless at that time?
Well, not at the Wade Hill hatchery.
But at
the
US,
school,
that
right.
was it. Okay.
But we were really content with just studying Sulphur Springs.
Right.
I mean, there are a lot of things going on, but they didn't want us, obviously, to be in fish culture for this fish. Now they wanted it. So we had, for the first hatch, went to London hatchery, east of Columbus, the division's hatchery. We saw them there. We were invited to see it.
These are the native brooks?
Yes.
Okay, so
we were
coming out of Spring Hollow, and what you had done at University School, they were now...
They went now to the state hatcheries.
Got it.
So we supplied them with all the brood stock they ever had that we know of.
Right.
Now, I don't know now because they never talked to us. But okay, then the next one was Castalia. They had purchased Castalia for steelhead, and they took a load of those fish. The bottom line on all this is both places, at one of the meetings, the last meeting we had for this organization, stood up and said, well, we were sad to report that we lost all our fish at London. A disinfectant got spilled in the pond and they were killed. The next meeting brought a brouhaha. They claimed that they had to destroy all the fish, all the brood fish at Castalia because of an infection from VHS, which is viral hemorrhagic septicemia. That's a mouthful. And right away, the Fish and Wildlife guy, I think, one of them got up and said, "What about all the rainbow there?" Oh, they didn't get it. And he goes, "Impossible." So it was clear they didn't want the fish. They didn't want a program of restoration.
So by this time, then, that's it. The Division of Wildlife asserted its authority, and you guys got out of that business.
Right.
What was happening with Spring Hollow? Were there still fish at Spring Hollow?
Some brood fish left in the pond, probably poached.
Okay.
But over at Sulphur Springs, that summer, Tom Stanley literally runs over to the school with a letter that he received from the division, claiming that it is time to remove these contraband fish from Quebec in Sulphur Springs. And it wasn't like, what do you think? It was, we're coming on July such and such with a fish shucker. And that's what prompted Krems to help us with the court case that we won.
So the long and short of that, because clearly there was a difference in philosophy between the Division of Wildlife and what you guys are doing here, and the merits of that are a discussion for perhaps another time. But what is the status of the native brook trout now? Are they still in those streams? Are they still in Spring Brook and Woody Brook? Do they still exist in the areas that you were first
Okay,
drawn
this
to?
will surprise you. The last I heard or saw of information on this was at the checkout at Heinen's. There's a magazine a quarterly magazine, beautiful, on cooking, called Edible Cleveland. It's a magazine, it's recipes and everything, local restaurants and stuff. And on the cover, as I'm in the checkout, here's a brook trout in a net, and it's a brook trout. And then I open it up, and here's a park representative from Geauga, and the one from Cleveland, Paul Pira and Mike Durkalek, in the article, claiming they are the gate protectors for this fish. And there was no mention of the history of how these fish got to their charge in the first place. And I was really, as they say, crestfallen. I said, that is, all the work the school did, any fish you ever had came from our hatchery. And
so those fish, Paul Pira is Geauga Park. So Geauga Park still has this native strain.
They do,
in
over at Westwoods Reserve.
Okay.
Off of 87.
And then Cleveland Metro Parks, Mike Durkalek?
There's one stream down at Hinckley
that has the native strain.
Yeah.
Okay.
As far as I know, they're hanging on.
Okay. But the original places that you went to, have you ever gone back to see the
Well,
Spring Brook?
first of all, the places that I freely move through are locked up.
Okay, can't get
You're not, you have to get a permit, to travel in there, and it's just I don't need to.
I hear you.
It's an emotional thing. It was a bitter pill.
At least it's good to know that the native strain still exists somewhere.
Oh yeah.
And there are people that,
Right.
that are interested in their conservation.
Right. And my last word about the thing is, in an argument about the role of a hatchery in this sustaining a population. There are measures you can take to make sure that in fact, there's still an equal argument that they should be crossed with another fish of brook trout. It's just like not marrying in the family.
As they do in fish culture with steelhead and
I
all
know,
the other stuff.
I know.
And so on and say, well, okay, I've got this interesting sort of last question for you, and that
Yeah.
is, Terry, if you were king for a year, what are the things that you would like to do, change, or accomplish? Built upon this extraordinary career that you've had.
My mission on many pursuits in this with people in education field. As king, I realized the kingdom has been shifting to more formal representations of science on a standardized basis across the country that removes uniqueness of experience. There's no unique experiences now. You could say that if you get an AP course at Hawken, you can get it at US, you can get it at Petaluma, California. The same syllabus, despite the fact that outside in Petaluma there's salmon and shore crabs. Here it's brook trout. So the idea was to somehow come to terms with the college board, whose business is to sell these texts and tests and promote that standardization. So I think some of the best science comes from non-standardized experiences. So look at the lives of Einstein and all these people that turn out to be the icons of science. They didn't have AP. And so schools, I would see, making significant time frames, continuous time, instead of just a 40-minute field trip outside the door, which we can do at US because we have the land. But what about schools that don't have the land? So I proposed an idea to me called, modeled after the sign you see going down Interstate 90, adopt a highway. How about adopt a stream for a school? So every school in the country, in the state, has a watershed nearby. There's something they can do on that watershed. And in our case, the experience we had at Sulphur Springs got us into the politics of Solon, got us into the politics of real estate and land management, of lawn care, and fish biology and forestry. So every school, if I were king for today, I would order, at least in our kind of school, one less course of AP so that kids were freed up. I'd also attack organized sports. I would say, be reasonable. The money that is made in this now with high school is so big for television circuits and everything. It's taken away the more time. So I would challenge the carving of time that each of these groups take priority in, and get at least school boards to sit down and talk about this, because we're losing the conversation of conservation in a lot of circles that used to be there. I came from a generation that went to right on the cusp of the environment movement at Michigan, which was big, and was big here. We got into the burning river and development of regulations on water. Oh, word regulation, bad. No. How do you have almost 400 million people living in large cities and not have some kind of regulation that controls air, water, and food? It's impossible. And the private sector cannot do it all alone. It's impossible and unreasonable to expect people with financial rewards involved to not be biased towards taking measures that may not be the best for public health. That's my point. And for a school to adopt a project, well, maybe not adopt a stream, adopt a forest, adopt a prairie, adopt a marsh, like that Mentor Marsh one is fantastic. And let kids work in there on a project, sub-projects. Drum up a lot of little sub-projects in a big project. But the key element is time. You've got to make time available, and a teacher that wants to do it.
Here. I just want to say what a great time listening to your story, hearing your passion and your plea for experiential education and opportunities to get kids involved in nature and out of doors, in your fish hatchery. It's been a marvelous experience learning about it. And
well, thanks to the Museum of Natural History and the club, the Trout Club therein, for this opportunity to speak out about these issues. There are a lot of people speaking out through different means in this around the world at different levels, the university, postdoc, post-university, and high school. High school is the most important. And I've got one last word. In all the years I've done this at US, although we had lots of kids in the program, it's always one or two in each of these groups that goes and stands out. That's the ratio. It's a very small ratio. It starts with their courage to try something different. Then they're constantly bombarded. Oh, you got to play football to be a man. You got to do this. You got to do this. And these guys, no, I want to study mushrooms.